Great. Well, I think we'll make a start. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for this very special webinar for digital communications. It's great to see so many of you here. We've got, I think, 27. Fantastic turnout. And I'm mindful it's a very busy time for funeral directors. Have you got sound? Is sound working? Yeah, sound's working. Apologies. Okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, thank you very much for taking part in this afternoon. I'm mindful it is a busy time for funeral directors, so understand that time is precious. Now, my name is Mark Binnersley, and if you didn't know, I'm SAFE's public relations provider, and I've been with the organisation full time since July, but a little bit longer than that, on and off. So what we're going to do today is talk about SAFE's new communications toolkit for independent funeral directors, which has been put together by the SAFE Technology Group, involving myself, Terry Tennons, Hannah Leverton, and Kieran O'Toole from Golden Charter. But before we get started on that, I thought it would be useful to give you a bit of background about me. Okay, thank you, Andrew, for your comment. Is that better? Good stuff. Yeah, do let me know if it's not. I can also perhaps turn it down if it's too loud. Great. So in terms of my background, I've been in public relations and journalism now for about 20 years. I started with the Shropshire Star newspaper in Telford, before heading down to Cornwall to work on the West Briton newspaper, which at the time was the biggest paid-for weekly paper in the country. And I rose to the ranks of chief reporter there. From there, I went on to China. I lived in Beijing for 4 years, and I worked for 3 years for the state news agency Xinhua. And the role there was to edit news stories written in English by Chinese journalists. And you've got sound now, Darren. It's okay. Great. Okay, so it was editing English stories written by Chinese journalists and giving them a native speaker sheen. And then in my final year in China, I worked for a security company that had been set up by a Beijing police officer. And my main task was to scour the Chinese press for security-related stories about crime and government announcements and so on. And it was to translate those into English for an e-newsletter, which we sent out every week to our clients and prospective clients. So that really was my first foray into digital marketing, as it were. And then in 2009, I came back to the UK and took up a role with Birmingham St Mary's Hospice, and I was their press officer initially, and that role evolved into press and digital officer as the requirement for press releases shifted to more digital sort of marketing, so their website and their social media channels. And when I left there in 2013, they had about 5,000 followers across Twitter and Facebook. They've now got around 15,000 followers, and a lot of these people are fundraisers who are actively involved in supporting the hospice. So you can see how important digital marketing can be for an organisation. And then after the hospice, I moved to a PR agency and worked for a range of clients in insolvency, TV licensing, a venture capitalist, and a private equity house, to name but a few. And then in early 2016, I joined the NAFD as a member marketing communications manager before setting up my own consultancy in communications in the summer of 2017. So that's my sort of background in terms of this role in this sector. So I've been working in, I suppose, the end of life death care sector now for around 7 years, if you include the hospice work as well. So what we're going to do is talk through the toolkit. If you've had a chance to view the slides before, that's fantastic. If not, don't worry, because all will be revealed shortly. So Why digital then? Why is this important to independent funeral directors? Well, I think there are three reasons really. The first one is that digital marketing can be low cost. So if you're a smallish family-run firm and you don't have the a big budget that a corporate might have, it needn't matter because you can still reach a good target audience using digital communication tools with websites, social media, and so on. The second reason, which I think is important, is unlike with traditional PR, you have control of the message. So, when you send a press release out to a newspaper, you go through the filter of a journalist, and you can never be quite sure that the message you want to get across will be presented in the way you would like it to. And then finally, digital marketing can be highly targeted. So some of you may be aware of the tools on Google and Facebook that help you target a geographical area. You can also target people by their age, gender, social interests, employment status, and so on. So, which you don't really have with newspapers. So with newspapers, you reach a general audience, and you've got no way of knowing who's actually read the newspaper. Whereas with digital marketing channels, you can see how many people have clicked onto your website and so on. So it can be very effective. So in terms of the toolkit, we've divided it up into 6 sections, and we want to cover digital marketing, online reviews, social media. We've still incorporated an element of local newspapers because we think those can be part of the mix, and also how to respond in a communications crisis, which I think is important if you're using social media as well as traditional media. But the first section that I want to talk about is brand. And whilst it's not necessarily a digital marketing discipline, we think it's a fundamental importance towards your marketing activity. So if you get your brand right, then everything else follows. So let's just talk about that. So in terms of brand, as I see it, there are 2 elements. The first one is the identity that you create. So your logos, the way you paint your premises, the uniform your staff wear, your letterheads, business cards, vehicles, and so on. That is the bit you can control. And then there's a second element, which is perhaps more difficult to control, and this is the perception that the public have of your brand. So really you can only influence that, and by getting the first element right, you end up having more control and influence over the second element. So how do you do that? Well, it's important. The starting point really is setting your brand values, and a lot of big corporates spend millions on getting consultants in to help them define their brand values, but you needn't do that as an independent business, and it's not that difficult to do really. So why is it important to have a set of brand values? Well, it strengthens your brand identity, and it will help you differentiate against the competition, which is absolutely vital. It ensures that your communications activity is consistent, so you have something that your team is working to, and it also helps that team to understand what the business's mission and purpose is. So I've done a sort of example slide of how a set of brand values might be presented as an independent funeral director, and this is very simple. So you have your brand purpose, which is what you're in business to do, and at its rawest form is to deliver funerals to families. Then there's the promise of your brand, which is to differentiate from the competitors. Perhaps it's to provide a superior standard of funeral care to all sections of society. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this. These are just examples of what a brand promise might be. Then you have your brand principles or values, and as an independent funeral director, some obvious ones might be integrity, quality, tailored to individual requirements, so choice, and that you're community oriented. So hello Noel, And that's particularly important for an independent funeral director, and an advantage as well. So if you're a corporate, you've got a remote head office, and the staff out in the communities are perhaps, they have to follow your centralized messages, whereas a local funeral director is much more in tune with their local community, and they've got distinct advantage there. So, and then finally you have your brand personality. So it could be, you're personal, you're passionate, caring, dedicated, and trustworthy. And that could mean that what people see at front of house is mirrored at back of house in terms of that quality of service. So, and as I said, there's no sort of right or wrong way to do this, as long as you can come up with a set of values that define your business and what it's in business for, and what it delivers to people, and what its promises. And these are some examples of other brand values from other firms. You'll see that the example I did before was actually taken from the bottom one on the screen, which is SSE, the energy provider. So that's the format that they follow, and you can be sure that they paid a consultancy hell of a lot of money to do that. But you don't need to. It's fairly straightforward. So how do you go about setting those brand values? Well, a good place to start really is with a brainstorm session. Take your staff off-site if you can, to give them a sort of clear heads, and if you can, get someone external to do it, so they can talk frankly about the business in your absence. It doesn't matter if you can't do that. If you want to do it yourself, that's fine too. And get them to brainstorm, what it is the business does, in terms of its purpose, what its values are, what it stands for, and what its personality is, and how you relate to your internal audience, so your staff and your suppliers, and your external audiences, so your clients and stakeholders within the community. And then once you should have lots of suggestions from staff. Some of them might be negative, but I wouldn't be too worried by that, because that can actually be turned into a positive, in that if it's not where you thought it was, then you have a good idea where it is and where you need to get to. So like a brand bridge, as it were. Hi, Cara and Hannah. Thanks for joining. So once you've got this list of brand values, then you want to get your team to narrow them down to sort of 3 to 5, and the personality traits, and then come up with some supporting points. So, if they think integrity is one of your brand values, then, spell out in a couple of sentences why that is, justify it. And then once you've done that, so that's, it should be an afternoon's work really, take the information away and sit on it for a few weeks and just let it percolate. And then you can arrive at a definitive brand purpose and promise, along with the agreed principles or values and personality, and take it back to the staff and present it to them. You're not necessarily saying that the staff are in control of this, but they're empowered by it, and they're signed up and they're buying into it. So give them a stake in it, and then you've got your brand values then. So it's fairly straightforward. And then in terms of implementing those, so depending on the size of your business, if you've got an HR department or people in recruitment, then you'll want to make sure that those values are now reflected in your recruitment adverts, documents, company handbooks, notices. Now, it may seem a big list here, but don't be daunted. You don't have to do this in 24 hours. Once you've got your brand values, you can implement them over a period of time in a sensible way that doesn't impact on the running of your business. And then you've got your marketing team. So you want to include a section on your website, perhaps setting out your brand values to let potential clients know what you stand for, but also start to see how those values can be weaved into the messaging and how the messaging reflects those brand values. So everything comes back to your brand values in a sense. And then there's a client literature. So if you've got brochures, estimates, invoices, anything that you can include your brand values on, or the brand values might influence the way they're presented So that's how you go about implementing it. And as I say, it doesn't need to be a 24-hour process. This needs to take time. Get it right is the important thing. So I hope that bit was a useful sort of background in terms of brand values. And this really, really underpins all of your marketing activity. It absolutely influences what you do, how you communicate with people. And if you haven't thought about this before you set off on a new website journey or a social media journey, then the chances are you could, I suppose, change your mind or communicate in an inconsistent way. But this makes it so much more easy to do, and it's worth taking the time to do it. So has anybody got any questions at this stage about brand and brand development? If not, I'll move on to the next section, which is digital marketing. I see Jerry is typing, so I'll just wait for that question to come up if there is one. No, scared them off with the brand values. Okay, so we'll go on to digital marketing then. So as I mentioned earlier, digital marketing. All right. Okay, so we've got a question from Jerry King. What would you recommend a funeral director does regarding logos? Well, I think logos are important. I think every respectable business should have one. It is a way of reinforcing your identity in the community. People see it becomes associated with your business. So if you are advertising in newspapers still, or it's on your website, then it can be quite a powerful way to project your business. In terms of creating a logo, well, I would go to a graphic designer and get one done properly. That's for sure. And I would let the logo's design be guided by your brand values. And you'd want to see, a couple of 2 or 3 concepts from a designer before you make a decision. But having a set of brand values in place will help you to design logos that reflect those values and reflect your business more accurately. So you'll have a much more powerful sort of marketing mix. So I hope that's useful, Jerry. Great, thank you. Okay, so in terms of digital marketing, so this is, I suppose, the main bit. So what does digital marketing mean? I suppose it's a bit of a daunting term, isn't it, really? What does it encapsulate? It's a bit one of those terms that's sort of hard to pin down. But essentially, it needn't be that complicated. It is really just anything that you do to promote your business via the internet. And chiefly that it tends to be your website. So in terms of the channels that we use for digital marketing, we've got website marketing, search engine optimization, pay-per-click advertising, content marketing, so that's videos, blogs, etc., social media marketing, and then your offline channels, so perhaps the more traditional channels. I mean, these things have so many different names, but they're essentially the same thing. TV advertising, massively expensive. Radio advertising, press advertising. I mean, there's PR as well in there, perhaps. Direct mail marketing, and that can be effective. I know funeral directors who use direct mail marketing for funeral plans, and they get a return on their marketing spend there. So that's worth considering. And outdoor billboard marketing, that can be incredibly expensive as well. So those are the sort of differentiators between online and offline channels. So in terms of the key elements of the digital marketing sphere, you have your website marketing, which is essentially it's your website and the content that's included on that. And your website is, I suppose, the ultimate destination that you want people to go to, whether that's via social media or via Google. And you want people to stay on your website for as long as possible and use the functionality to contact you, whether that be a contact form, live chat maybe, or email or telephone. And something to bear in mind with your websites, which is easy to overlook, and it's a simple tip, on each page, have some kind of call to action to get people to go and look at something else on another part of your website. So it's to keep them on your website for longer. I mean, they say that people, you only buy from people you know, and I think that is true. So your website, getting people to stay on your website longer is helping people get to know you. And indeed, the CMA consumer research last autumn showed that most people's purchasing decisions from funeral directors was a result of somebody they knew or via recommendation from a family or friends. So I think there's some truth in that, if that makes sense. So your website is at the center of things in digital marketing, and then you have two drivers via Google and search engines to your website. So there's disregard social media for the moment. So you've got SEO, search engine optimization, and this is using a strategy of, I suppose, organic. How can I explain it? So it's content on your website which perhaps has keywords, relevant information about your business and sector that Google is going to see as being credible in terms of how it positions you in the search rankings. There's also other sort of elements to this, so links from other websites to your website, which enhance your website's credibility. There's some technical fixes as well. That's not my area of expertise, however, but for instance, labels and meta tags. So the writing that you see when you get a Google search result of the identity of the website, you can influence that, and the text you've got in there in terms of keywords and geography can enhance your position on Google's search results. And then the second one is pay-per-click advertising, and this is I suppose more of an instant success, but you have to pay for it, and we'll talk about that in a second. So those are the two sort of conduits really for getting people to your website. I mean, PPC is the most popular platform in terms of search engines is Google, and if you put them together, you have what's called search engine marketing. And there is a website or a company out there called SEMrush, which you can go onto and find out about your website and competitors' websites in terms of their rankings and that. So it's quite fun to play around with. So in terms of pay-per-click, so we've all seen these. I would think if you Google something, so here you've got funeral plans. I've got Carolyn typing there. I'll carry on for a second. So when you see a Google search result and it's got the little ad block at the side, then that means it's an ad. Someone's paid for it to be there. So how pay-per-click works, it's complicated and it's not complicated, if that's of any help. But so essentially there's sort of three criteria. You pay for someone to click onto your website, so you don't get charged unless someone clicks through to your website. And you go into an auction, so you say have 4 companies bidding for keywords related to the business that you're in, and the one who's bidding the highest has a kind of priority, but Google also uses the quality of the advert that's there and the keywords that you've used. So if you have a better quality advert and more relevant keywords, you might end up higher up the ad ranking than somebody who's bidded higher than you, if that makes sense. So that's how pay-per-click works, and it does drive clicks through to your website, but you're paying for this privilege. So that's something to bear in mind. I think really I would recommend you could use both, but in the long term you want to have a sensible search engine optimization strategy, which is going to get people coming to your website organically. There's a bit of a cost to get it set up, but once it's going and you maintain it quite easily, you'll have a steady stream of traffic to your website, and you'll appear in the search results. So, and this next chart, I suppose, explains that. So if you look at the red section on the left, pay-per-click shows there's cost, also a high number of clicks from the outset, and that shows the short-term effectiveness of PPC. But if you look at the bottom on the left, you see the grey bar, and then that sort of goes across and goes up into the sandy curve. That shows once your search engine optimization is working and you're getting relevant content and you're making Google happy, you're getting a higher number of clicks, and you'll do so for a longer period of time. So it does need to be maintained in terms of writing blogs and adding content and getting links, but I would argue that is a cheaper way in the long term than PPC. So, right, so Jerry said a strategy of they ask you answer for organic traffic to your website. Okay, so what would you mean by that, Jerry, for me? So I'll just go on to the next one, let Jerry's typing away there. So so a question that you get asked today, answer on your website. Yeah, okay, yeah. Good idea. So this next slide here is an example from Golden Charter of how I hope you can see that clearly, of how they appear in a search result for Golden Charter. I've also looked how they appear in a search result for funeral plans, and they do appear on the first page. They've also got their ad as well. But you'll see at the top, they're there in terms of the ads. So they've obviously got their keywords right, their ads of good quality, and they're potentially the highest bidder for that position. They're also, they've got a decent SEO strategy in place, because you've got all of the different sections of the website showing up there. So it's seen as a very credible website by Google, and you've also got all the business information there on the right-hand side. So if you've got a web developer and they haven't already done so, you should go onto Google My Business and fill out all of your information about your business, because that will enhance your position from Google's perspective. So it's all of these sort of little things add up to enhancing your position online and where your website appears in relation to your competitors. So the next slide, this I think for me reinforces the value of search engine optimization. So 93% of online users start with a search engine, and then in terms of your traffic to your website, if you're appearing at the top of the search results, so disregard the ads for the moment, if you're the top one, you're getting a third of all of the traffic to your website, which is great. And then second and third, still fairly respectable. You're going to get clients and inquiries 18 and 11%. So but that's really useful to bear in mind. I think what Google has changed quite considerably over the years. There used to be a tactic that you'd stuff content with keywords, but I think Google penalizes website owners for that now. So it's more about, yes, keywords I think still matter, but having richer content, so relevant content that is credible and positions your business in a credible way. So it might be blogs about funerals and bereavements that position you as an expert. I think Google is really looking for that nowadays. So it's a sort of quality over quantity of keywords. And there's other areas, so it's supported by social media. And if you get something in the local newspaper, then you're try to get a link on to your website on that, so that will enhance your position from a Google ranking perspective. So in terms of the key learnings, so digital marketing is not necessarily a difficult thing to understand. It's basically your marketing that's done via the internet and other electronic devices. The other thing that we perhaps should include in this, and that we are going to expand the toolkit over time in a way that hopefully doesn't make it too unwieldy, but we want to include perhaps a section on e-newsletters, because I think those are part of your digital marketing strategy, and perhaps that's another webinar entirely in terms of how to use MailChimp and get the most out of that, because that really does have some good functionality in terms of the user metrics and knowing who's clicked on what and what interests people, so you can really tailor your content accordingly. Then you have your digital marketing manager, is somebody who is in charge of all your digital sort of online marketing activities. Good web design is important. Having rich, relevant content about your sector will enhance your position on Google. And I think ultimately, if you don't have a website, or you've got a website that's 8 to 10 years old, I would seriously think about redeveloping that, because websites they're evolving all the time, and if your website's not mobile friendly, as Jerry will advise, then you're perhaps not positioning your business in the best light in this day and age. So those are the key learnings from digital marketing. As I say, we'll develop this toolkit over time, so there'll be more information. Hopefully it's a resource for SAFE members to dip in and out of to help them on their marketing journeys. So on to online reviews. So this is a short section, just a couple of slides here really, but I think this is incredibly important for any business really. Although don't look at mine, because I haven't attracted or haven't gone out and got loads of reviews. But I suppose I'm more inclined to help my clients get the reviews on their websites. So I think it's important to have a strategy for online reviews, particularly as a funeral director, and those reviews will show up on Google. It will add to your credibility on Google if you've got lots of positive reviews. Also, you're looking for reviews on Facebook as well, so people recommend other businesses via Facebook. And one way to go about this is to think about the contacts that you have with your clients, and look for relevant parts in those contacts where you can ask them to give you a review online, whether it's Google or Facebook. You could have something at the bottom of a customer survey, or maybe the invoice, or some literature you give with the invoice, or at any point after the funeral has taken place and you've got a happy customer, happy client, ask them to give a review. I've done some cards for funeral directors which give simple instructions on how to use the review sections on Google and Facebook. So I'm happy to assist with those if anybody's interested. But having lots of reviews on Google will stand you in good stead. And I know one funeral director who it's a central part of their marketing activity really, to make sure they're getting plenty of reviews coming through. So I would strongly advocate getting Google reviews and Facebook reviews, and also don't be worried about getting the odd negative review. See that as an opportunity because you can respond in public. If you respond in the right way, it actually shows your business in a really good light. We're all human. We all make mistakes from time to time. So so a link from website through to Google reviews is a good idea. So responding to a negative review, I think you need to make an assessment there, and we'll perhaps come to this at the final session, which is sort of crisis communications. If I can perhaps talk about that when we get to that, if that's okay. So The next element of your sort of digital marketing activity is social media. And I hope you're all on Facebook and Twitter, because it is really useful. So essentially, we are the media now, and we have, as I said, the control over the message with digital media. I think funeral directors have a real opportunity with Facebook and Twitter, and I would say those are the main platforms that that you should use for your business on social media. I tend to look at these as I suppose in terms of serving two slightly different functions. So your Facebook is really about connecting with communities. It's much more of a community-oriented platform, and it's much more based in a sort of locality. So if you think of if you're on Facebook and you think of your friends and Facebook network, then I suppose the chances are that the bulk of those will be people in the area in which you live. Maybe wrong, we all have different ways of doing this, but by and large, I think that's the case. And then Twitter is more of a conversational influencer opinion platform. And from a funeral director's perspective, it's perhaps a good place to grow your your profile amongst industry peers and share best practice and talk about the profession and keep your finger on the pulse of the profession, actually, because there are lots of organizations. SAFE is on Twitter, the other trade associations are, and there's lots of opinions being thrown around, so it's a good finger on the pulse platform. So that's how I'd separate those two: Facebook for families and prospective clients, Twitter for your sort of industry knowledge and sector knowledge. That's to say there isn't a crossover, but broadly, that's how I suggest using those two platforms. Instagram, some funeral directors, I believe, are using Instagram to reasonable effect, but and it's a very popular platform. But I think the challenge with that is you've got to have plenty of images, and if you're not confident that you're going to have regular source of images on a weekly basis, then I'd perhaps leave that aside for now. But I wouldn't say don't do it, but think about whether you're going to have the content to serve it. So if you haven't used Facebook before, and I don't want to go into too much detail here in terms of how to set up a Facebook page, maybe again that's another webinar, but these platforms are incredibly intuitive. Just go to facebook.com or twitter.com and follow the sign-up process. Bear in mind, if you're doing it for the first time as a business, you'll need to set up a Facebook profile for you as a person, and then set up via that profile a Facebook page for your business. So Facebook doesn't allow profiles for businesses. A lot of people did that at the start of Facebook, but now it's quite clear that they're two separate things. So yeah, so you need to have a Facebook page and follow their setup process. And the same with Twitter. And again, going back to brand, there's an area on Facebook for your logo, for images, so the banner image or logo that depicts your business. So if you've got your brand values right and your logo designed correctly, then half is the job is half done there for you. So and it will save you. See so many Facebook and Twitter pages where they're either incomplete or they've got some grainy image that is perhaps not quite relevant to the business or doesn't put the business in a good light. But if you've got a really smart, high resolution, relevant image and logo, then your business is going to be positioned in a good light. And if you've got your social media appearance right, then it reflects well on but obviously their premises is going to be spotless and well appointed as well. So it all kind of follows the same thread in terms of quality and how you position yourselves. So in terms of the content, how do you, as a funeral director, write about what you do every day on social media? Well, it's not as difficult as it may seem. I advocate having a content schedule. So get yourself set up on Google Sheets or Excel spreadsheet, a calendar, a month calendar, and spend a couple of hours each month thinking about and filling out that calendar. Perhaps it's at the end of the month for the following month, 2 posts, maybe more per week that you will put in that calendar. And believe me, if you do it like that, you will have a creative stream of conscience. If you don't do that and you try to think every day, what shall we post about today, you'll get writer's block. So put aside a couple of hours each month to create a content calendar. So what kinds of things could you write about? Well, you might want to tell people about the standard of your premises and your care. You might want to talk about any events that you're involved with or holding. You can look at key events throughout the year. So as a funeral director, you might want to send your thoughts to people whose mums are no longer with us for Mother's Day. Same with Father's Day. There's Valentine's Day. If somebody's missing somebody this week on Valentine's Day, it could be lonely. So there's stuff like that you could write about that's not necessarily about your business, but is about kind of what you do and what you care about. You could also talk about the funerals that you do. So if you get permission from families to do photographs of perhaps some of the unusual funerals, maybe if they've got a horse-drawn hearse, always makes for a nice picture. The other week, the Morton's funeral directors in Birmingham did a motor cycle hearse funeral for a very popular local fundraiser, and they had a cortege of around 250 motorbikes, and the family were totally up for letting the world know about this funeral. So I tipped off the Birmingham Mail, and they sent a photographer along. They got some beautiful pictures of Morton's owner Derek Case on the motorcycle hearse and other elements of that. And so it was great. It was a great story. It had lots of engagement. The newspaper shared it on social media. We shared it on Morton's social media channels, and it was very popular. So again, the funerals that you're doing, if you've got a slightly unusual funeral and the family are happy to do so, then see if you can publicize that as well. And you'll find that you get a rich stream of content throughout the year from this approach. There's also another tip. Google every morning funeral directors and then click on news, and you may see stories about the funeral profession, and you may find that there are some there that are worth sharing about the funeral profession. You'll also see stories there about other local independent funeral directors and what they're doing. So it's a good source of market intelligence. It will keep your finger on the pulse and might provide some inspiration for content that you might want to put out there. And no one's going to accuse you of copying anybody, and it will go down well with your followers. So as you can see, it can be quite easy to develop a sort of schedule of content for your Facebook and your Twitter pages. So hopefully that's helpful from a social media perspective. Oh, and the other thing really to bear in mind with this, if you're posting, make sure you include some posts that are going to link back to your website, because going back to digital marketing, you want to drive people from your social media channels to your website to learn more about your business and perhaps make an inquiry and just become a friend of your business, really. So make sure, I'd say at least a third of the posts that you make have a link to your website, providing you're happy with it. So that concludes the social media element. Now we're coming on to the traditional media, which I guess, being an ex-journalist, is my I suppose main sort of specialism, that and copywriting. And the traditional media, has changed massively over the past 10 or so years. It was the case that a few years ago the PR sector was saying the media industry is kind of behind us, and now the tables have turned, and newspapers, local newspapers, are really innovating in terms of how they're using the online space and helping companies promote themselves online. But press releases are still relevant, and funeral directors are perhaps an overlooked section of certainly the business community by traditional journalists. So I think there's a chance, if you send a media release to your local newspaper, that you could get some pick up some coverage there. And it's a fairly simple process. If you've not done that before, have a look at your local newspaper website. At the bottom of that, they will have contact us, and you're likely to have journalist names and email addresses there. If not, just phone the switchboard and ask for somebody on news desk, and find out what the best email is to send them a story. So if you haven't written a press release before, great if you get a professional to do it, but if you're not minded to do that, you need to answer a few sort of points, really. It's the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how. Kipling's 6 honest serving men. If you answer those points in the information that you send to the media, then you'll be on the right foot. The other point to bear in mind is that what constitutes news. There's an old saying in the industry, man bites dog. You would expect a man to be bitten by a dog, but so that's not necessarily news. But if a man bites a dog, then that's different. That's news. So just bear that kind of analogy in mind when you're thinking about a story. As I say, if you've got an unusual funeral happening, or there's going to be a big turnout for the funeral, you've got maybe a young person, and the family are keen to have a tribute and a record of their passing, their funeral, then there's a good chance your local newspaper will want to cover that. So those are things to bear in mind. In terms of the sort of more day-to-day side of things, your announcements about your business, recruitment of new staff, purchase of new cars, new fleet, send those to business editors, and I reckon you'll get coverage for that. So again, it's all profile for your business, and if you can get it online, then try to get a link to your website in there, because that will help your SEO. And it's most likely that if you do have a story, then it'll be shared on the newspaper's website, social media, share away. So I think that probably covers the traditional media side of things. Deadlines are still a thing with local newspapers, so try to avoid phoning a journalist when they're on deadline. So if they're a daily newspaper and they publish in the evening, they'll have deadlines throughout the day, probably sort of early afternoon. If they're a weekly paper, they come out on a Thursday, their deadline is likely to be Wednesday lunchtime, something like that. So don't phone a journalist with a story about new cars at 11:55 on a Wednesday if they're a weekly paper publishing on a Thursday, because they'll give you short shrift. So just think about the timing as well of when you contact them. And sometimes stories can take a while to filter through with newspapers. So if you send a story tomorrow and don't see anything for maybe 2 weeks, don't lose heart, because they do take time. They're bombarded with stories. So that covers the contacting the press. Although it's not strictly digital marketing, it's worth bearing in mind that they're online, and information about your business on a newspaper website is good for your all-round digital marketing activity. I think it's part of the mix. So, right. Crisis communications. Now, we had a question from Lucy Coote earlier about a negative review on Facebook or Twitter or on Google. So I think if you look at any big brand, their strategy is always, if they get a complaint, take it offline. It's a case of DM us and we'll respond out of the public's eye, and that's a good strategy to have. So I think you need to make an assessment as well in terms of the complaints you've had. I think it's sensible to make a polite reply, which would ask that person to email you and give a generic email address and pick that up. But never engage in an online argument or with somebody who's not happy with your business, because that could degenerate and you expose yourself to creating the wrong perception about your business. So get any comments offline by getting them to email you or phone you, and then talk about it out of the public's view. But you should generally write a response. We're sorry to hear this, that kind of thing, and can you email us or email us your contact details, and we'll call you right away to sort this out. So that would be the kind of tone that I would take. There's the other side of this is where you have somebody who is completely unreasonable, and anybody who's looking at that review will see that this person is frankly a crank, and the review might be absolutely horrendous about your business, but most people, I think, are sensible, and they can see, this person is completely off the scale. And I had it a few years ago with one funeral director who got somebody who's writing a really nasty review, and they were really upset. The funeral director was really upset about it, and we tried to get Google to take it offline. Not sure what the outcome was in the end, because it was a long time ago, but I tried to reassure them that actually looking at this, people are going to think this person's actually a bit crazy. So I don't think it's as damaging as you might feel it is, although I understand and respect your concerns about this. But so you need to make a judgment call on whether that person and the way the review is written is sort of credible and reasonable. So in terms of communications crisis involving the media, the first thing I would say is not to panic. And I know that's difficult when you're in the thick of it. You think your reputation is on the line, and obviously to a degree it is. But if you panic, you'll make the wrong decision. You need to take a step back and take some time to think things over. Journalists may try to hurry you along into commenting, saying we've got a deadline to meet, but I think it's always worth trying to buy more time from them. The deadline is their problem in a sense, not necessarily yours. And generally, you should be able to get more time from a journalist. I mean, there was my background in PR. I worked with a couple of the Trojan horse schools in Birmingham. So that was you may remember a few years ago, there was a plot to Islamize a number of schools in Birmingham, and there was a letter leaked to the Sunday Telegraph, and Sunday Telegraph journalist Andrew Gilligan reported that, and the story went viral to the extent that the world's media descended on these schools in Birmingham. They even had news helicopters buzzing over the schools while the kids were in lessons. It was a horrendous situation. And the school was taken over by a new education trust, and we were appointed by them to help them recover their reputation. And one of our strategy was to tell the truth and be transparent, get the media in to communicate what you're doing to put things right. And I think the key learning from that really is to be as transparent as possible in the face of a crisis, and not to try to put a spin on things, but to show what you're doing to put things right, to recognize that you got it wrong, and this is what we're doing to put it right, and this is how you recover your reputation. we were very mindful at that time that, you know, we can say lots of nice things and convince journalists of lots of positive things about these schools, but if Ofsted comes back in 6 months and says, no, it's still a mess, then all of our good work would have been in vain. So we're very clear that we had to be transparent and communicate what they were doing. And that is the thing with a crisis. I mean, sometimes, you know, you can respond and it can be sorted there and then, but there might be a need to have some reputation recovery following that. And that could be the case in the care sector or in the profession that we're in. So I would say, in terms of a crisis, take a step back and don't panic. Try to consult with somebody removed from the situation who is able to give you a perspective from both sides of the story, and then develop a message which is going to acknowledge the other side of the story. I suppose, thankfully, as SAFE member, you've got support from myself in any times of crisis. So you know, pick up the phone if you've got a problem where a story is unfolding. You know, don't bury your head in the sand. Come to me, and you know, as part of your membership, I will be able to assist you with that. You know, take much of the worry as possible out of your hands. I helped a funeral director in Scotland for SAFE not long ago, who had been approached by the Sun. I was able to clarify a few things with the newspaper and reassure the funeral director that they weren't writing a story which was going to be detrimental to their reputation, and so it was. So yeah, so having that sort of third party to take a cold look is very useful. So don't panic, and take some time to think about a response. And don't be tempted, if you have a negative story about you, to phone up the editor and have a rant at them, because really what you want to do is get them on side for your reputation recovery. And I advocate building a relationship with local newspapers to help reduce that threat, in a sense. So I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the session. I hope that has been useful. If I give you my email address, perhaps if you've got some further questions, I'm happy to answer those. And maybe if questions arise over the coming days and weeks that you can't think of now, I'd be happy to answer those as well. So if you've got a pen and paper, my email address is hello@Mark Binnersley, so it's MARK BINNERSLEY, spelled as my name, .co.uk. So it's hello@markbinnersley.co.uk, and feel free to ask me any questions you like about marketing communications, and I'll be happy to assist. But thanks ever so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll talk to Terry and the team about other webinars along the sort of marketing side of things for you. Thanks ever so much.